Well, good morning again from Washington, D.C. This is former Congressman Mike Ferguson. I'm the leader of BakerHostetler's federal policy team. And thank you to all of us to all of you for joining us this morning for an exciting edition of our webinar series, BakerHostetler, Bringing Congress to You. As always, I'm delighted to be with my fellow co-host, fellow senior advisor here at BakerHostetler and former colleague from the House of Representatives, former Congressman Heath Shuler. Heath, it's very exciting to be with you today on this very special edition of our webinar series.
Yes, thanks, Mike. I'll be especially looking forward to this one. What a thrill to be able to host the Majority Leader this morning.
Yes, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer spent many years in the House leadership. He's helped shepherd some of the furthest reaching legislation in recent decades, from the Affordable Care Act to the Americans with Disabilities Act. He's an accomplished leader and a legislator, and he's a good friend to us, Heath. He's been a great friend to BakerHostetler. He's participated in our legislative seminars over the years, and I know you and I are both come to know him well. You in particular.
Yes, Steny has been a good friend. Most importantly, he's been a mentor both when we were House colleagues and beyond. As you said, one of the most successful leaders, but also one of the most respected people in Congress. And not to mention, he does have the best chief of staff in Congress with Alexis. It's a great honor to welcome representatives from the Maryland's 5th Congressional District, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. Steny, it's Heath Shuler and Mike Ferguson. Welcome to the BakerHostetler webinar. Steny, are you there?
I'm told he's dialing in any second.
Okay,
should be on with us any moment. Heath. My last term in the House was, I believe, Steny's first term as the Majority Leader. Back in 2007 and 2008, and I had to get used to not being in the majority that term, and having a new majority leader in the House. Of course, to members like you and I were, one of the most important things about the majority leader is he schedules the floor. He decides when we're going to have votes and what's coming to the House floor. So it was so interesting to see how he worked, and he was. I have to say, even though I was in the minority party at that time, he was somebody who really cared about hearing from members on both sides of the aisle in terms of what our thoughts and priorities were for even just the House schedule, how he scheduled the floor votes and how that impacted our schedules, our families. He was somebody who was genuinely open-minded and wanted to hear from everybody.
That's the one thing that I remember most about Steny when my freshman year was, he truly cared. It wasn't just talk. It was, he would have conversation with you, see if you needed something that you didn't understand. Was there a way to help, whether it be your constituents in your area or on legislation? And the amazing part about it is I would see him talk to just as many Republicans on the House floor as he would Democrats. And, that's always nice to see, of having someone that can, cross the aisle and have these great relationships.
Right. So we expect the majority leader, to be joining us any moment. Oh, Steny, you're there. Well, it's Mike Ferguson and Heath Shuler. We've been saying a lot of nice things about you, as you've been. If you may have heard some of them as we're waiting.
I heard
for you
just
to dial
the last
in.
couple of them. I'm talking all Republicans.
Do you want to just be on hold for a little longer, and we'll continue the process and just tell them what an incredible leader, what a great statesman you are, and what a mentor you have been to me, not only while we serve but also now. And I wanted to say, I think you have such an incredible staff that you maintain with Alexis being the chief of staff for a very long time there, and the things that your staff has been able to accomplish over the years. I think that says a lot.
For those of you that are on the phone, Heath, I was trying to interrupt you. For those of you on the phone, understand he talks about Alexis Covey Brandt, who's my chief of staff and has been with me since 2002, and is an extraordinary person. She is the hugest Heath Shuler fan in Washington, D.C., or maybe the country. She loves Heath Shuler.
Is that politics or football? Steny?
I think it's the person, to be really frank with you, but I don't know. She's a football fan.
Sometimes
I think she's a
sports
fan.
Didn't like my politics, so.
Well, you have to be flexible in this business. And I'll tell you what, I follow closely behind Alexis in being a fan of Heath Shuler's. And you guys have, with BakerHostetler, I've been here about 3 times now, and you know that I am a huge fan of Heath's. And Heath, as you know, was chair of the Blue Dogs, which was the conservative group in our caucus. Conservative overstates it, but the moderate focused on financial fiscal responsibility, which I do as well, and a lot of other issues that I certainly agreed with them. I wasn't a Blue Dog. I'm not a Blue Dog. I'm not a member of any of the factions. But Heath and I became very, very close friends. And Heath, truth be told, was critical at a time when they had 52 Blue Dogs, very big part of our caucus, in terms of the success we had in 2008 and 2009 in making sure this country didn't go into depression. So Heath is not only a really good person, but also a very smart legislative player. And you're lucky to have him at BakerHostetler. So Heath, thank you very much for inviting me to be with you.
Oh, thank you. I'll turn it over to Mike now, and we'll get started with some questions. And I can't thank you enough for being on the webinar. What an incredible team here at BakerHostetler with the law firm, and then the government relations side with Mike leading the way for us. So I'll let Mike
has been terrific and a good friend.
Steny, thank you, and thanks Heath and Steny. We were chatting about my last term in the House was your first term as the majority leader, and I was saying how different it was having you. We had a different majority leader setting the floor schedule and deciding what bills were coming to the floor. But I had to say, as I was adjusting to my role in the minority for that one term before I retired, you were somebody who always genuinely wanted to hear from members on both sides of the aisle. And how did votes impact our families? How did it impact our schedules? And you were just so solicitous of all of us, no matter what side of the aisle we came from. So that's another little summary of all the nice things we were saying about you before you came on the line. But we're particularly delighted here at Baker. Here at BakerHostetler, we're particularly delighted with how good you've been to us here at the firm, and what a friend you've been to us. And of course, I know a lot of that stems from your great relationship with Heath. And so we're delighted you're here on the webinar. You've got so much going on in the House these days, not just your responsibilities as a leader and scheduling the floor, but helping to craft and schedule and move legislation. You announced that the House is going to be returning this month to take up a police reform bill. Of course, this has been on everybody's minds across the country, witnessing some of the tragic events that have been going on. And, would just welcome your thoughts generally on what we've been seeing in recent weeks. You, of course, have been active in civil rights and race relations in this country for many, many years. We had Jim Clyburn on a webinar last week and Steve Scalise on a webinar last week, and talking about some of these issues. And I'd love to get your perspective. What are your expectations for what kind of reforms the House may take up, and where might there be some agreement with your friends in the Senate and the White House to try to get some of that into law?
Well, Mike, first of all, thank you for your kind comments, and thank you for your point. As majority leader, I try to make sure that members, from an institutional sense, members of Congress, not Republican members or Democratic members, that we do try to make their service in the Congress as effective and as family friendly as possible. And that is very difficult. As Heath will tell you, I remember when Rahm was recruiting Heath to run for Congress in Western North Carolina. Heath's major problem was, look, I've got two small children and my wife, and I just don't know that I can do it. And he tells the story about Rahm calling him on a regular basis. I mean, like daily. And particularly when Rahm was with his son or his daughter at an event and saying, well, Heath, you need to run for Congress. By the way, I'm at my daughter's soccer game right now, and we're having a wonderful time, et cetera, et cetera. And he would do that. And he's kids about it, and of course we kid Rahm about it. But it's we laugh about it, but it's critically important to have the ability to stay connected with family and with your constituency and your home, with the neighborhoods and people that you represent. And I've tried to do that. And frankly, Kevin accuses me of adopting his schedule, but we've adopted a schedule that I think Republicans and Democrats have agreed upon. Now, having said that, that was in normal times. These times are not normal. These are the most unnormal of times, the most unique of times. Not only have we been confronted with a pandemic that is a once in a century pandemic, a pandemic that has forced us to not have a recession or depression, but to, in effect, put our economy on hold, or somebody said put it in a coma. And that's had extraordinary economic ramifications. And those ramifications are going to be with us for a very long period of time. And because of that, and because of the experts saying, look, the only way you're going to slow down and defeat this epidemic or pandemic ultimately is to distance yourselves, to stay apart, because this disease, this COVID-19 is so transmittable in the air, in proximity to human beings. A cough, and of course a yell at a ball game or at a demonstration is going to make it more dangerous. So, Mike, the schedule has been a unique schedule, as you know. First of all, we passed 4 major bills dealing with COVID-19, and we passed them in a bipartisan fashion. They didn't always start out bipartisan, but they ended up bipartisan. When McConnell put a bill on for $250 billion that we thought was not complete, there was no discussion between Democrats. But ultimately, we did have discussions, and we got to a bipartisan bill that we passed. And the first 3 bills were bipartisan. Now we have a HEROES bill, which is an extraordinary sum of money on the table, $3.4 trillion. Nobody in the Congress of the United States ever thought they were going to vote for a bill that was that large. Yet we passed it through the House of Representatives. We are hopeful that the Senate will come to the table so we can discuss that bill. The governor of my state, Larry Hogan, is the chairman, the Republican chairman of the National Governors Association, and Cuomo both said, look, the states are hemorrhaging money. And if you don't help us, we're going to have to be laying off heroes, police, fire, teachers, emergency medical response teams, sanitation workers, all sorts of people who are critical to the daily lives of American communities. And obviously we felt that was being very negative. In addition to that, however, we added another essentially $500 billion for cities, counties, municipalities, large and small. We originally made provision for those over 500,000, but obviously those under 500,000 represent millions and millions and millions of Americans, and their revenues had also fallen off very severely. So we're hopeful that we can come to some sort of discussion on that bill very soon. But the schedule that we have put together is an unusual schedule. Because in April and May, essentially, we came back for COVID-19 bills. We came back for FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We had passed that with 2/3 of the votes through the House of Representatives. went to the Senate. They added on what I think, frankly, was a positive amendment from the standpoint of those 1/3 of the Congress, sort of equally divided between Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives, who did not support the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments. So I thought we would be in good shape to pass that bill. Sadly, the President of the United States, 24 hours before we were to consider it, decided no, and he asked the members to vote no on the Republican side. 126 of them who had voted for the bill decided that they weren't going to vote for the bill. They did vote to go to conference, but half of them. So we'll see where we go from there. But the schedule that I provided for in June is very unusual because we've been so backed up. What I did was reserve the first 3 weeks of June to accommodate our new procedures, which allow for virtual voting, virtual hearings, virtual markups. The Republicans have not been enthusiastic about that, but it seems to be working well. The committee chairs that are doing it saying it's working well. This is a phone call, but normally what I do nowadays is Zoom or WebEx or something like that. And I think that works very, very well. But, Mike, we're trying to accommodate the schedule so the committees can get work done. I've announced already that we're going to come back a week earlier than I had expected, that we're going to come back on Thursday the 25th to consider the Justice in Policing bill. I think we'll also have some other significant bills on the floor Thursday and Friday. And then we'll meet the next week, and we're going to meet on the Affordable Care Act, trying to bring the costs of premiums and copays and deductibles in the Affordable Care Act down to a place where people can, in fact, afford them. We're also going to deal with a major, major infrastructure bill. I know you guys will want to be looking very closely at that on behalf of your clients because it's going to be probably a 3-day bill. It's being marked up on the 17th by Mr. DeFazio's committee, and it will come to the floor, I expect, on the 29th the 30th and the 1st and the 2nd of July. The balance of July will be reserved to have the National Defense Authorization Act marked up, the appropriation bills, all 12 of them marked up, and then the last 2 weeks of July to consider those two bills, which, as you know, historically have a lot of amendments. Okay, well, that's probably been too long on the general. Maybe we'll go to more specifics now.
Well, Steny, that's a lot on your plate, and it's amazing especially during these times. Typically it's hard to move stuff through Congress, as we know, and in an election year, it's even harder. And with all the crazy things going on in the world right now, it in some ways makes it even harder. The couple things you mentioned, the police reform bill, and that next. You obviously have passed the HEROES Act, so that what would be that next pandemic relief legislation. You obviously know, you mentioned Leader McConnell, you mentioned the president. For something to become law these days, they've got to sort of sign up in some way, shape, or form for
not sort of, Mike.
They got
to sign up. Yeah, you're right, in some way.
So what are the
prospects for we need to
some becoming law?
Go ahead, Mike. Well,
sorry. What are the prospects for? Yeah. So what are the prospects for something becoming law, both on the police reform bill and maybe on another pandemic bill?
Well, I'm hopeful on both that we can reach agreement that will ensure something comes to become law, signed by the president, passed by the United States Senate. We understand it's not just enough for us to pass bills. That's very nice. We don't want to send just message bills. And there's going to be a lot of messaging, but we're not interested in just passing message bills. First of all, let me on the pandemic, on the COVID-19 legislation, on the HEROES bill, very comprehensive bill dealing with the same three subjects we've been dealing with, making sure in the HEROES bill, making sure that states and municipalities and counties and cities are able to continue services to the American people, which we think are critical, particularly at this time of great stress. And we think when McConnell said, well, let the states go bankrupt, I think his members, privately at least, went to him and said, Mitch, that's not an alternative. At a time when we're having great stress on the private sector, we need to make sure that the public sector has the resources and the ability to meet some of the crisis, both on the health side and on the social services side, and on the security side in terms of police and fire. So I'm hopeful that if they come to the table, I think we know that we're not going to get exactly what we wanted, and they're certainly not going to get exactly what they want. But there is still a great need in the community, in the country. And therefore, I think every senator is hearing from their governor, Republican or Democratic, and hearing from their mayors and hearing from their local county commissioners are saying, hey, we're in dire straits and we need this help. So pass, if you don't pass the House bill, pass a form of the House bill, which gives us some relief and some help. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the senators, Republican and Democratic, to come to the table. They haven't done that yet. I'm hopeful that they do that soon, because we just saw yesterday with the greatest one-day spike that we've had during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's scary, but it's a real message that, look, this thing is not over. We haven't won, and we can't give up the fight, and we can't render ourselves unable to serve our public. On the other bill that we're going to be considering on Thursday, the 25th of June, justice and policing, we've had a galvanizing event in this country. And when I say a galvanizing event, we have for some period of time, for a long period of time, we passed a lynching bill called the Emmett Till lynching bill. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old who lived in Chicago, was visiting in Mississippi, and was at a store. And as I think some of you probably know the story, coming out of the store, he was alleged to have smiled at a white woman who happened to be, I think, the wife of the store owner. And they became so outraged that a black young man would smile at a white woman in Mississippi that 3 days later, Emmett Till was brutally murdered, defaced, brutally dismembered. And his mother had the courage to have a funeral with the casket open, so that America could see the consequences of racism and hate and segregation. And we've seen that in the George Floyd killing, the neck to the knee, which is a allegory for so many in this country of color who have themselves felt their knee on the neck, that may not have stopped them breathing, but stopped them from exercising the full qualities of their character and their talents, and put them in a feeling of being treated as second or third-rate citizens. It is long past time when we acted, and there are too many examples, daily, weekly, monthly examples of this. You can name so many people who, like George Floyd, had their lives taken, and the African American community absolutely sees the disparity in black and white deaths at the hands of law enforcement, who are supposed to keep us safe and protect us. And so we're going to pass a justice and policing on the 25th, and that deals with police accountability, transparency, training policies. I think if you look at the bill, you will be, some of our members were concerned that we were going to go off on real tangents. Karen Bass, who was the former Speaker of the California Assembly, very, very thoughtful member, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She and Senator Harris and Senator Booker, working with staff and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus and others, including Mr. Nadler, the chairman of the committee, came up with a bill that I think is a very reasonable bill, making sure that the policies and procedures of the police are consistent with maintaining law and order and safety, at the same time treating citizens in conditions that are not dangerous. Here, clearly, Floyd was fully under control, but we've seen that so many times. In my own Prince George's County, we had a police officer shoot a person in his cruiser with his hands handcuffed behind his back. The officer shot him 7 times. That officer is now under charges, of course, and was fired immediately. But we think this bill is a reasonable bill. So I'm hopeful that Republicans, if they have some suggestions, we're going to have a markup next week. We had a hearing this week. We're going to have a markup next week. I told a number of Republicans in the Problem Solvers Caucus yesterday on a Zoom conference, if you've got ideas that either add or detract from what the bill presents, put them on the table. Let's discuss them. We want a bill, and Karen Bass, the chairman of the Black Caucus and one of the principal sponsors of the bill, she wants a bill to become law, to change conduct, to give confidence to citizens. Hopefully, that's what our Republican colleagues want, and that's what the president wants, and hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, my sense is there might be a real opportunity for a bipartisan agreement on that topic. I think you're right. I also think you're right on the next possible pandemic bill. I think you have a number of Republican senators who I think are open to, as you say, providing some relief to states and municipalities. You have a number of Republican senators, including the leader, of course, who I think have sort of drawn a bright line on insisting on some sort of immunity or lawsuit immunity for liability protection. Do you think there's an openness to some provision if you can strike a deal on some of the local and state aid and relief, that there might be an appetite in the House to find room for a compromise on liability protection?
Mike, I think the answer to that is yes in this sense. As you recall, when we passed the initial $8.3 billion in March, we were hopeful that 3M would produce some 15 million masks in a very short period of time. Now, that was a smaller number than we would now talk about, but in any event, that was the number we were talking about at that point in time. 3M was concerned that if we produce that many masks that fast and somebody gets sick, we don't want to be liable. Our masks aren't perfect, and you know, we don't want that much exposure. That was not in our bill, as you recall, Mike. It went to the Senate. The Senate asked that be included, and in fact, it was included. So the answer is, we want to make sure that consumers are protected, that patients are protected, customers are protected, employees are protected. In the sense of enterprises which impact on them will follow the rules and regulations and make maximum attempts. As every business, your television ads, we want to make you safe when you come into our store or to our restaurant, but we also want to make our employees safe. And to the extent that they meet certain standards, which we've talked about, OSHA standards or other standards, there may well be room to talk. What we don't want to see is sort of blanket liability protection so that there is no redress if somebody does not act in a way that does follow best practices and follow rules and regulations and the law in terms of how we protect one another. But the answer to your question, I think, is we did it before, and if the Senate comes to the table and wants to compromise, and that's part of their proposal, I certainly think that would get fair and fulsome consideration.
I'll kick it to my friend Heath.
Steny, you've always led the way on Make It in America, initiative since, I guess it goes back to 2010, if that's
2010, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, it started out with a couple of buttons, and all the members we were wearing the buttons on the House floor to represent that to make it in America.
Right.
Through this pandemic, we've seen issues as it relates to a lot of the PPE supplies back to the United States, and then obviously the relationship that is kind of been with China relationship currently and the trade policies and so often. Is there anything on the horizon that we can kind of look for that would kind of help our small businesses and American businesses get back into make it in America? Is there any better time and opportunity than the current time that we have now?
I think you're right. I think this is a very, very good time. I've been talking about making it in America, as you point out, for the last decade. And as you know, I've generally been a pro-trade Democrat. I don't believe we can shut ourselves off from the rest of the world. I believe trade is absolutely essential to grow our economy. But I also believe that we need to create an environment in our own country where people can make products in America and make profits making products in America. I think American workers can compete with any workers in the world. I think American entrepreneurs can compete with anybody in the world. But we have to create an environment that's obviously tax and regulatory policies, while at the same time, as I say, protecting consumers, protecting our environment, having the quality of life that we want also to have in America. I think we can accomplish those objectives. And when we see that we had to go scrounging around the world for ventilators, for gowns, for rubber gloves, for masks, with hat in hand, and we have to rely on some countries for certain products and certain components of electronics that we produce. We have to make sure that as we come out of this, that we are focused on making sure that America is not dependent, particularly on China. I don't want to call China an enemy, but China is not our friend. China is a harsh competitor, both economically, and unfortunately, China under Xi is becoming a more expansionist country in many ways. So we need to look to making sure that America has the capacity to produce and does produce the items we need. We certainly need to have a stockpile that is much more robust, and we need to have plans that are much more robust, not just to meet a pandemic, which is, this is a once in a century at this level. Ebola really, I can't remember a time in American history when we shut down voluntarily, in effect, our economy. It didn't happen in World War II. It didn't happen in the Great Recession. It didn't even happen in the Depression. It didn't happen in World War I or World War II. We shut down our economy, and one of the reasons is because we didn't confront this pandemic as early as possible. I think it was unfortunate that our president said this was a hoax, because what it did was lead the government and the people to a false sense that this was not real. Well, as we have seen, with now 113,000 deaths, I think is the number, very, very real and very fatal to a large part of our citizenry. So I'm hopeful that we can re-energize, and we've never abandoned Make It in America, as you point out, Heath. We've always talked about it. But this is a time where we have seen the results where America was not producing essential components. And I want to produce a lot of other components that may not be essential, but consumer goods and this, that, and the other, electronics. But I'm hopeful that American business understands that it's much safer to do business here in many, many ways. Our laws are better. Our context is better. But nobody ought to delude themselves that people are going to do that if they can't make a profit. So we have to provide an environment in which it's profitable and people can compete in the global economy because of the context of what they're doing in America. but it's a good time to,
Steny,
and I'm really going to be pushing it. Yeah, Mike?
Steny, it's Mike again. You're talking about China. Of course, that's on everybody's minds these days, and the rapidly changing relationship we have with China, given all of the current events. Senator Kennedy sent a bill over, the Senate sent a bill over to you all in the House recently that would impact listings of Chinese companies on American stock exchanges. It blew through the Senate, wasn't considered by the Banking Committee, passed on a UC. There were no objections to it from either side of the aisle. I think probably caught some people by surprise, the speed with which it went through, and lack of a lot of extra consideration in committee. I know Chairwoman Waters and the Financial Services Committee is looking at that now. Do you have any sense for how the House is going to deal with that? Will the House maybe pass that Senate bill, or might the Financial Services Committee try to make changes to that and send it back to the House or back to the Senate? And how do you think that may play out?
Mike, honestly, I don't have a good sense of that. I will talk to Chair Waters to see what her thoughts are. I haven't discussed it with her, and frankly, it hasn't been on my radar screen. I know of the bill, but I really don't know its status. And we had a chairman's meeting yesterday. Waters mentioned a number of pieces of legislation. She did not mention that one. Let me follow up on it, but I wouldn't want to say something that I don't know really enough about to give you a thought of where we're going on it.
Sure, thank you. The other topic that came up recently, we were doing a webinar with Patrick McHenry, her counterpart as the ranking Republican on financial services.
And Mike, let me say, by the way,
yes.
Can I say something? Just
sure.
On Patrick McHenry, when he first came to the Congress, I guess it was the first year I made majority leader in 2007, and right. He was a pain in the neck. He was strutting all over and raising hell and banging on the drums and all that. Stuff.
I know you mean that in the best possible way.
Let me tell you the story. So, then we lost the majority, et cetera, and then we came. I'm not sure whether we were still in the minority, but I was at an event, actually for Alexis's husband, Mike Ferguson. Mike, and just so happens Patrick and I were sitting at the same table, standing up, eating little hamburgers. And I said to him, Patrick, you were a real pain in the neck when you came to the Congress. He said, I know I was. And Patrick and I now have a wonderful relationship. And the reason I say that, Maxine Waters and Patrick McHenry are working together. That does not mean they always agree, but it means that Patrick is trying to make that committee work. As you know, his predecessor, Hensling, was very hard to work with, very hard-nosed. I don't know whether any of you at BakerHostetler dealt with him on trade issues or the XM Bank or something like that. But Patrick McHenry has taken real responsibility, really responsible, and I really enjoy working with Patrick McHenry, but it shows you can't always take first impressions to heart. So go ahead.
Well, no, I think Patrick would probably wear all of that description with a badge of honor, and I would probably agree with it all, right? As you say.
I bet you did. He's got with it all.
He's got a lot of energy, and he's got a great attitude. And I think you're right. I even said to him on our webinar, you and the chair of the committee are not very similar ideologically, but boy, you've found a lot of things to work together on, and I think that's to both of their credit.
Patrick, let me tell you, there are really good people on both sides of the aisle. Mike, you may have heard me say it. The Congress is less than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of good people on both sides of the aisle. And if we could get over this demand in many respects by some of our hardline constituencies on both sides to be confrontational and make your political point, we could be a lot more productive. And Patrick McHenry is a perfect example. He came to Congress with that sort of zeal of, I'm going to fight with these Democrats, kind of, hold them to their, nose to the grindstone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as he stayed in the Congress, it's not that he's become any less a Republican or any less a strong proponent of the policies that he promotes, but he became convinced, as hopefully all of our members will become convinced, that people sent us there to get a work done, to get a job done on behalf of themselves, their kids, their community, and their country. And we let partisanship and, frankly, the outside groups pressure us into confronting as opposed to cooperating. Compromise is not a dirty word. It is how all of us operate our daily lives. We can't always get it our own way. We can't demand that people do what we want them to do because they have some ideas of what they want to do. And so we give and take. Patrick McHenry is a perfect example of a guy who grew into a guy who thought to himself, look, I'm here to do a job. The public selected, half Democrats and half Republicans. We're a little more now. They were a little more before. But we all have to work together to get things done. The FISA failure was a perfect example. 126 Republicans voted for the FISA bill that essentially came back from the Senate the same. There was one amendment, the Leahy amendment, that was the Leahy, I think it was Lee amendment, so Republican. It was a bipartisan amendment. It really, in my opinion, strengthened the bill somewhat. The 126 didn't change their mind. Trump said, vote no. There was a confrontation created. And FISA is now pending in the Senate and is now been not authorized for 2 months, which we pray does not have an adverse effect on our national security or some terrorist event. But it is
right.
It is a stark example of a partisan, not philosophical difference.
Right. Right. Heath and I talk about this very topic pretty frequently. And I was regarding Patrick McHenry, one thing that we were talking to him about yesterday, which may go to your point, is this topic of flood insurance. I guess the committee passed a flood insurance product a long time ago, and waiting on the House to consider it. I imagine there's, I think it passed unanimously. I don't think there was a dissenting vote in the committee. Any idea if the House is planning on taking that up and what may be holding it up?
Well, we need to do flood insurance. There was a bipartisan agreement, but it somewhat fell apart. You had Mr. Scalise speak the other day, and of course, this is a huge issue for him and for Louisiana.
Right.
We need to pass a comprehensive flood insurance bill. But Mike, as you know, it is an extraordinarily difficult bill. Why is it a difficult bill? Because you got a lot of people living in flood zones. If you declare the flood zones, you can no longer live there. Their house value goes to zero. That's a tough thing. On the other hand, if you say you have to be insured, we're no longer going to bail you out. If you live there, their insurance premium becomes as large as their mortgage payment. So it is, a very, very tough issue to deal with. So Mike, I'd want to check again with Patrick and with Maxine on this, but I think there was what we thought was going to be a bipartisan agreement. I think that agreement did not hold for whatever reasons, and we're still struggling, and the committee is still struggling to get a bill that can be agreed upon in a bipartisan fashion. And we're going to hopefully get there. As you know, we've extended it, and I think until September 30th, I want to say, but maybe it was December 31st. But right. In any event, we keep limping along and doing extensions, but not solving the problem because it's tough to solve because of the individuals and their the value of their home. In some instances, if we don't have a flood insurance program, they can't sell their home. They got to
right.
So it's a tough issue, but I think I'm right because Maxine and I talked last year about how we thought there was going to be able to be a bipartisan solution, and then that sort of fell apart. Now I'm going to check if you think if there's been a recent vote that was 100%, very frankly, if that's the case, I'm going to bring it to the floor, assuming that 100% transfers to Republican and Democratic agreement on the solution.
See, you're a get it done kind of guy. Last question. I know your time is precious.
Let me say one more thing that somewhat relates to this. I think you or Heath brought it up. We are also, and the committee is considering, pandemic reinsurance program. As you know, we had TRIA, the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, because after 9/11, nobody could get a loan to build a large commercial building. And the real estate industry, construction industry was very nervous that they would not be able to get insurance. And if they couldn't get insurance, they couldn't do a construction project. So we did TRIA. We're looking at, because so many businesses now which had loss of business or shutting down business insurance, or business interruption insurance, I think is what it was called. The response to the insurance from the insurance industry was this: we don't cover pandemics. So we'll have to see what we can do on that.
Well, thank you on that. Last question, real quick, on K through 12 schools, colleges, universities. Everybody's in the middle of trying to plan for reopening in some way, shape, or form in the fall. It's they all have concerns about financial impacts on their students and on the schools themselves. What are you hearing from your Maryland schools, and is there things that Congress can be doing to address some of these concerns in the education system?
Well, it's tough for Congress to do something because each state, as you know, runs its own education system. There's a lot of controversy about how much influence the federal government has or should have. I'm one of those who believes we need to give real assistance because education is such a central part of the responsibility of every level of government, but it is a state and local responsibility. So our governor has not made a final decision at this point in time, nor has our school system. They are hopeful to be able to return, but I think the message of yesterday was not a good one in such a spike. And if you look at the map, it looks like sort of this starting, I think, at Virginia or North Carolina and coming south and then west along the southern border up to California. We see a spike in cases, so that I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before where we had more new cases than any other day during the course of this pandemic. In that context, it's going to be very difficult for education officials to come to a determination of whether it's safe to have kids come back, because kids, particularly elementary school level, they're not going to distance. One of the good news is that children, for the most part, I know we have this respiratory, what seems to be an offshoot of COVID-19, but children under 17 are largely either not getting it, or if they get it, very, very mild forms of COVID-19. That's the good news. The bad news is, however, they go home and they see parents, they see grandparents, maybe they see, in my case, great-grandparents, and obviously they can be carriers even if it doesn't have a consequential effect on their health. It can be transmitted very easily, unfortunately, to people with whom they come in contact when they get out of school. And of course, it's a very, very tough issue. We all want to see the economy open. Last Saturday, I drove to the grocery store, which is about the only place I go nowadays, and it was amazing how many. And I live in a small rural community, essentially. How many cars were on the road? It was jammed. When I say rural community, actually we have a base of 21,000 people, so it's, in that context, probably more suburban in some respects. But it's going to be a very, very tough decision for educational leaders to make, and governors and county execs and county commissioners to make in terms of their school systems. And they're gonna have to rely to some degree on the health officials. And we thought by this month that things would be receding and going down very substantially. And that didn't happen. We see a spike here and in that southern border of our country that I talked about. We're seeing a spike in Arkansas, which frankly had very few cases, now has had a big spike in Arkansas. And I don't think the health experts know exactly why that's happened, but it's certainly exacerbated by people getting out and among one another, because that's how it's transmitted. So I certainly can't give you any specific advice as to whether school systems are going to reopen. We have universities who've already decided that they're going to do virtual semester, and some other universities are still, as I understand it, Notre Dame, for instance, is still waiting to see what it's going to do, whether it's going to open up in September and have the kids come back and have actual classes on campus. So I don't think any of us, I don't think most educators know right now what they're going to do. But it's 2 months away, so they're going to have to make a decision pretty soon.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Mr. Leader. It has really been a privilege to have you. We've covered so many different topics, and it's also just fun to visit with you. And it's great to spend some time talking with you, and especially with everything that you have going on and all the responsibilities on your plate. We're so grateful, as always, for your time and insights. And Heath, it is no surprise that we've had such a great conversation with the leader.
Yeah, Steny, thank you so much for your time, your commitment to our country, your statesmanship. It's obvious with the words that you speak, but it's even more obvious with your actions with people. And forever grateful for you and your mentorship to me. So thank you, and what a great day, and to kind of round out our webinar here. Thank you.
Well, Heath, thank you very much, and Mike, thank you very much. Both of you together make a great team on behalf of BakerHostetler, and I always look forward to talking to both of you and everybody on the phone. We just have to have the psychology. We're in this together, and as tough as it is, the way we're going to defeat this virus, and frankly, the way we're going to defeat another virus that we call racism. Both are harmful and devastating to our country. Both we need to confront. One, hopefully we will overcome more quickly as soon as we get a vaccine and a therapeutic that works and mitigates greatly the effects of the virus. But we also have to defeat racism. We said at the beginning, we hold all these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now we would certainly say women. And if all of us were created equally, then we need equal treatment. And I tell people, and you as lawyers know this, and others who work in your firm, they may be self-evident, these precepts, but they are not self-executing. And one of the things I'm proudest about being a lawyer, I went to Georgetown Law School, is that lawyers have been so often the instruments of making sure that self-evident premise was a reality for many. And let us keep on together doing it, each in our own role. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Steny. Heath and I are going to have some closing comments for our audience, but we're delighted that you joined us, and thank you so much for making so much time for us so generously today.
You bet. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Well, Heath, it's a heck of a way to round out our series. It's always great to hear from the Majority Leader, and really appreciate the chance of sharing this conversation with him and with you today, because I know you guys are close.
Yeah, these webinars have been a lot of fun, and I greatly appreciate having the opportunity to host with you. I hope the audience has enjoyed them as much as we have.
Yeah, we're grateful to all of you who've been with us today and for our previous webinar sessions. We hope that you'll stay in touch. We'd love to hear how we might be able to be helpful to you and to your company and your organizations. Our BakerHostetler federal policy team has been staying very busy in this strange world we've been living in for the last 3 months. We've been helping clients navigate a whole new set of challenges, and whether it's the House or the Senate or the executive branch, we're staying active and providing our clients with over-the-horizon insights and key policy developments, as well as advocating to help shape some of these regulatory and policy outcomes. And we'd love to work with you too. If we're not already working with you, please feel free to visit our website, reach out to me or Heath or any of the members of our team if you have questions or if you have any government affairs needs. And Heath, as always, it's great to be with you. I'm wishing you well and your family well, and hope to get to see you in person again very soon.
Thanks, Mike. Same to you and to our audience.
Well, signing off, this is Mike Ferguson. Thank you, and good day from Washington, D.C.